Hello and welcome to Dialogue. With former U.S. President Donald Trump's return to the White House, the international community is taking a closer look at how China and the U.S. relationship will evolve under his second term. Regarded as the world's most important ties, how China and the U.S. handle each other affects peace and stability, as well as development and prosperity in the world. China has expressed the hope for a stable, healthy, and sustainable relationship with the U.S. Will the Trump team respond in kind? How will trade, which is worth of more than $700 billion, evolve from the existing frictions and challenges? What can China do to continue to push for free trade and globalization? Join us for our discussion today, live from Beijing. I'm Xu Qinduo. Joining me today are Rick Dunham, visiting scholar at Tsinghua University, Carl Fei, professor of strategy at the BI Norwegian Business School, and Dr. Shao Yuquan, senior research fellow at the Shanghai Institute of International Studies, and Harvey Dzodin, senior fellow at the Center for China and Globalization, who is also a political appointee in the Carter administration. Welcome to Dialogue. So, Rick, you are in Washington. I will start with you. Now, very soon, we are going to have, the start of the Trump administration 2.0. So, what are the likely priorities for his second term?
Well, I think his top priority is going to be economic. He ran on bringing back the economy, taming inflation. I think it will be to continue to lower interest rates. I think it will be to tighten the border. I think you will see mass deportations getting started, and I think it will be trade. I think you will see tariffs getting started globally, and particularly you will see moves to start higher tariffs with China.
Harvey, so in terms, of course, there's domestic issues, trade policy, also related to foreign policy. How do you think his foreign policy will be different or any different from the Biden government?
Well, I think we don't know yet, quite frankly. The best we can hope for is that a lot of the extreme and outrageous things he said during the campaign was a bunch of political talk. And maybe he'll normalize many of his views. Personally, I don't think he will. I think he's the kind of person who demonstrated in his first term that he means what he says. He's somewhat unpredictable, but he seems to have a lot of grievances with other countries, with China, particularly, but even with allies in Europe and with NATO and so on. So I think it's going to be, as the Chinese curse goes, an interesting time for the next 4 years.
Interesting time for the next 4 years for the entire world. But in any sense, Chinese President Xi Jinping extended his congratulatory message to President-elect Donald Trump. So, Yuquan, if you look at the message, President Xi said that, China and America can, quote, find the right way to get along in a new era. So what's your understanding, the right way in a new era between the two countries?
I think the Chinese government's message is very clear and consistent, that we hope that the bilateral relations with the United States can be guided by the principles of mutual respect, peaceful coexistence, and win-win. I think the Chinese government for the past several years has been consistent on this. No matter which administration is in the White House or is in Washington, the Chinese way is as the same. But I don't know whether on the U.S. side the message can be received well, or whether they will make the same. They will meet with the Chinese side in the halfway.
But Carl, if you look at the world today compared to 4 years ago, I mean, it is definitely moving toward more about a multipolar world. For example, the recent BRICS summit And you do see the rise of the global south in the sense, due to partly the Ukraine conflict, Gaza a conflict over there. So it's a bit different from 4 years ago, probably. So how will Trump, let's say, conduct his policy, especially externally? Is it any different from the first term?
So thanks for the question. I should acknowledge that I'm an American working a lot with China. I'm a Democrat, and I'm based in Norway. I think that Trump is going to recognize that it is more of a multipolar world, and more importantly, other countries around the world are going to mention this or recognize this. I think we're going to see Europe become a lot stronger and more unified in trying to recognize probably that they need to be more responsible for their security, not only relying on the U.S. I think on the positive side of Trump, most things I honestly see as negative, but I think on a positive side, he might have some success in moving forward to come to a resolution for crises in Ukraine and in Israel. I think he'll be fairly strong there, and I think he probably will say that he's going to, withdraw quite a bit of funding from Ukraine, and thus that Ukraine should move towards a solution, and maybe he could be more successful than the Biden administration in trying to have some progress in both of these conflicts. That's my most hopeful point, but I'm concerned about many other things around the world, such as the high tariffs that he's likely to impose.
Mm-hmm. The high tariffs, Carl, he did talk about 60% of extra tariff on Chinese goods in the campaign trail. But also he talked about, asking the Chinese side to purchase American agricultural products, right? Seems there's, room probably to make a deal in terms of trade. I mean, on the positive side, if you look at the issue.
Yeah, so I think the key positive thing for Trump is that Trump is a businessman at heart. And so if he can see something that he perceives is good for him or good for the U.S., there may be movement and possibilities to come to some sort of agreement. So indeed, maybe ways to look at how China could purchase more things from the U.S., help U.S. companies in China, et cetera, could be helpful. But it's also worth to point out that Chinese companies have not been idly sitting by. They've realized that this scenario of increased tariffs might come into play. And so they've been starting to establish operations in other countries. And so if these tariffs come into place that are especially high for China, you probably will see Chinese companies shifting some of their production to some of their other facilities, such as in Southeast Asia, like in Vietnam and in Thailand. But let's hope that somehow some lower tariffs can prevail. That is better for the whole world. At the end of the day, countries should specialize in what they're best at doing. And if I get sick, my family doesn't care where the medicine comes from as long as it cures me.
Mm-hmm. Well, Yuchen, obviously, as Carl pointed out, China has experienced, say, Trump the first term and then Biden administration, now Trump backs again. So I think at least some Chinese companies, if not Chinese government, they have some experience in dealing with Trump, and also probably they got some preparation too in expecting the return of Trump.
Yeah, just as my colleague said previously that some Chinese companies have already moved their manufacturing sites to Vietnam, to Thailand, and to some European countries, and Mexico also. So they are trying to find their way to do business in a more convenient way. But on the government level, I think the Trump administration will try to find a deal, try to have a deal with the Chinese government. Right now, during the campaign, Trump talked a lot about 60%, 100 to 200% tariffs on Chinese goods. We don't know whether he would do that or not, especially at the very beginning of his term. But no matter what, I think Beijing will also the Chinese government will also try to find a way to reach a kind of arrangement with the Trump administration. At the same time, the Chinese companies are smart enough to do business around the globe.
Mm-hmm. Well, Rick, of course, he also talked about, went so far as, mentioning removal of the normal trade status between the two countries. Then let's assume there's a 60% extra tariff on Chinese goods. Is that doable? I mean, if you look at the inflation rate, inflationary pressure on the U.S. consumers, I mean, if you add more tariffs, that will be an extra burden for the consumers.
First, it's doable. It would be very painful for American consumers, but I don't think Donald Trump really cares about that. I think that he would just blame it on China. But I do want to point out, 2 days ago, I had a conversation with two of the top trade negotiators from the first Trump administration about China. And they were saying that he's going to throw out a lot of these numbers, 60%, 120%, 200%, and to keep China off balance. He does not believe that China lived up to the terms that it agreed to during the first Trump term. He believes that China talks a lot and will reach some sort of agreement and then not live up to it. The two people said that in the second Trump term, it's all about results. It's not about sitting down and reaching agreements. So I think that the Trump negotiations, if Bob Lighthizer comes back again, it's going to be much tougher. They do want to negotiate, and I do think they want to negotiate from, one, a point of strength, and two, to keep the Chinese government and negotiators off balance. I do think that they're risking the American economy through higher inflation. I don't think that they really do care that much about the inflationary effects of tariffs, not only on China, but on Europe and the rest of the world. And I think that that is the biggest risk of tariff wars. And I think that considering that they won the election largely on the effects of inflation that were caused by the pandemic and the Russian invasion of Ukraine, I think it's a big risk for Trump in the midterm elections and going forward.
Harvey, of course, in addition to China, Trump also talked about imposing 20% tariffs on goods basically from every country, including European countries. So that will cause, as Rick pointed out, some rift, probably even with allies, with other countries, neighbors, for example. So that will create some probably backlash or pressure on his government.
I think it's going to create pressure on the American government, but I don't think Trump cares that much. Trump demonstrated in his first term that he doesn't much care what other people, other countries say. So if Europe, for example, is hurt and there's inflationary pressures on Europe, Trump won't care one bit. In fact, it may make him happy. He seems to revel in creating pain for both allies and for people who are not allies. So I believe, like I said before, that we're in for interesting times, but they're going to be rough times.
Well, in addition to tariffs and trade, of course, people are also looking at the tech, trade in the tech area. For example, the high-tech products from the U.S. Now we have this small yard, high fence policy. People are worried that Trump might expand that to a complete decoupling in terms of that kind of trade. Harvey, are you concerned with that?
Yeah, very concerned, because it would just mark a continuation of the trend that you mentioned, because the American government under Joe Biden and under Trump before him had been turning the screws on China and high tech. And I think that Trump,
seems there's a tech glitch,
with reckless abandon. The difference between the first Trump and the second Trump administration is that now he has so many ideologues and smart ideologues in place. I think they're really going to go for it. And if the first Trump administration was a bull in the china shop, the second is going to be that much worse.
Much worse there. But with that being said, Carl, he also talked about, for example, in terms of electric vehicles. Import of Chinese electric vehicles. Yes, there's a high tariff already, more than 100%. But he did talk about having the Chinese side to invest in the U.S. to manufacture those vehicles inside the U.S. Do you think he meant it, or he's simply just empty talk?
I think Trump might be open to some discussions that would benefit the U.S., such as having more Chinese investment in the U.S., such as more purchase of U.S. goods. Let's remember, it's not only a 60% tariff that he's proposing on China, but a 10 to 20% tariff on most of the rest of the world. As a result, actually, Mexico will probably become a particularly attractive place for Chinese companies to be located due to NAFTA. So this is one thing to keep in mind. In terms of the electric vehicles, well, Trump doesn't seem to be overly concerned about the environment. He surely is going to have less focus on the environment than the Biden administration. So I'm not so hopeful that there'll be radical changes there. And currently, of course, there's not very many Chinese EVs coming into the U.S. due to this. Unfortunately, the U.S. is not following, for example, the policy of Norway, which has no special tariffs on EVs, unlike even the EU that are coming from China. One thing I would like to point out is that my big concern is that in the first Trump administration, there were a number of people that were sort of close Trump allies that had similar ideologies to Trump. But he also had people that were more traditional Republicans. Now he's sort of figured out who is who. And I'm much more concerned that now we're going to have people in the administration, most of the key people in the administration, very aligned with Trump and willing to do what he does. And so fewer people to sort of hold him back, let's say.
Fewer people holding him back. So, Rick, does that mean, from what you have said, are we expecting, like, at least from the beginning, some kind of chaos probably around the world, with trade tariffs?
I do think so. Let me just say one thing about the electric vehicles. I think that's unpredictable because of one man, who is Elon Musk. I think we can't predict the EV policy of the Trump administration because I think Elon Musk has his ear, and I think that we don't know what it will be. But in terms of chaos, I do think that we are going to see a lot of unpredictability in the first months of the Trump administration. But I do think he will try to make his mark in the Middle East. I think he will work with the Saudis. I think he will work with Benjamin Netanyahu. It could be in unpredictable ways. I think we better watch out for what will happen with Iran. I also think what will happen, the pressure he will put on the government in Kiev to reach accommodation and give up territory to Russia. And the only question is if he gives any security guarantees to President Zelensky in exchange for him surrendering sovereign territory. But I think we're going to see some chaos around the world as he undermines NATO, as he sort of goes to war, trade war with the EU and with traditional allies, and even perhaps in Asia, as he undermines the alliance with South Korea and suggests that South Korea pays for more of its own defense, and perhaps even with Japan, because he doesn't have a relationship with the new government in Japan. I think it will be very interesting to see as he develops new bilateral relationships.
Well, Yuchen, as we said earlier, if you look at the Chinese response in general to the U.S. Tech restrictions, basically, I think there's in general a consensus. That is, we need to invest more in indigenous innovation, invest in research, invest in innovation. So that trend will continue probably under the Trump government 2.0.
The Trump administration will continue the Biden administration's policy on the emerging technologies. It will continue to the so-called small yard, high fence. But I borrow one concept from a U.S. colleague that he said it's a big yard, low fence, actually. But I think the Biden administration will continue this policy, try to strengthen its, try to limit the investment from the U.S. To China on those technology innovations. So, which is a very negative factor on China-U.S. Cooperation on technology development. So I guess the Chinese government will continue its policy to build its capability, strengthen its capability on indigenous technology development. And another factor which is not in the interest of our bilateral relation is some people in the incoming Trump administration, they are very negative about the student education exchanges between countries, especially try to limit the number of Chinese students who study STEM in the United States. So some people possibly will try to push those very extreme visa policy. So all these things are very dangerous. So I guess that we will wait and see and try to see the key positions, who are on those key positions, and then try to figure out what the policy will be.
Speak of being dangerous, Yu-Chen, of course, people cannot avoid probably the top number one, I would say, issue between China and the U.S. That's a Taiwan question. What's your projection? What's your understanding? What kind of policy will come out of the second term of Trump?
First of all, Trump, he himself is not interested in Taiwan. He doesn't understand the Taiwan question. He's not interested in the cross-strait relations. And his goal is very clear, that he does not want to have a war with China in the Taiwan Strait. And secondly, during his campaign, he said a lot about Taiwan stole our jobs, which he meant that semiconductors. And then and also he said, if you want us to protect you, then you have to pay money to the United States. So it's his thinking. But on the other side, those people within the Trump administration, those security hawkish people, they talk a lot about so-called try to strengthen military deterrence against the Chinese mainland, which means that the U.S. will continue to strengthen its security cooperation, military cooperation with Taiwan, which will make the cross-strait relations development into a more dangerous direction. So what we will see is that there is a kind of a battle between President Trump himself and those hawkish people within his government. So far, I don't know what the direction will be, but for those hawkish people, ideological, so-called supporting Taiwan democracy, or those people, they are very dangerous for the future cross-strait relations.
Harvey, do you share the sense of that, across Taiwan Strait, the situation could be very dangerous?
I think it could be dangerous. I think that Trump does not have an interest in Taiwan either. I think he's purely negotiable. He actually has a negative view of Taiwan. And like was just said, he believes that Taiwan's ripped off America by taking American jobs and by diminishing the American chip industry. So I think that it's going to be a different calculus with respect to Taiwan, and Trump's going to see what kind of bargain he can make with Taiwan. And it could be good or bad. It could for China or Taiwan and for the world. But I think we're in for uncertain times on Taiwan and on other issues because Trump is so unpredictable that anything could set him off or anything can change his mind. They used to say he would take the opinion of whoever he spoke to last. I don't know what's going to happen in this administration, but I'm very worried because the people who will be in there most likely are going to be ideologues who are going to be much smarter, much better prepared than the people in the administration, first administration of President Trump.
Well, Rick, of course, it's not about just China and the United States. I wonder, how will, his approach in dealing with the European Union, for example, in dealing with Russia, in dealing with other Asian countries, somehow will also affect probably the relationship between Washington and Beijing.
Oh, exactly. I think it will be fascinating to see how his relationship with Putin affects the relationship with Beijing, because he has a different relationship with Putin. Obviously, Joe Biden had no relationship or a negative relationship with Putin. That will be interesting to see. Also, his relationship with Kim Jong-un. I mean, he has a relationship there. But his relationship with Putin very much worries the European allies of the United States. I mean, it will be interesting, because in a way he has that Nixonian relationship in reverse, where Nixon had a relationship with China to balance out the Soviet Union. Trump has a relationship with Putin to balance out China. And I don't know if he is that kind of geopolitical thinker that Nixon was, but I do think that it changes the calculus. And you throw in India there, and I think we could be in for a fascinating few years in the world, because you have a multipolar world, whether Donald Trump wants to think that or not, and you have relationships between these powerful men. And I think the world will be different based on the personal relationships.
Personal relationships. So, Carl, if you look at other areas, I mean, critical areas, for example, climate change, transnational crimes, drugs, which are those areas that require cooperation among nations, in particular China and the United States? So many people are probably, less optimistic in, for example, in climate change because of who Trump is.
Yeah, it's certainly, he doesn't care as much about climate change as he does about many other things, and that's a challenge. But on the other hand, I think some of these areas that affect the whole world still provide some of the best chances for China and the U.S. to collaborate on, and it's important that we have some areas of collaboration to hopefully grow and expand moving forward. Maybe fighting international crimes could be one of those, since there's more agreement on that. But fundamentally, Trump is primarily interested in what is good for the U.S. and himself, and he will spend less effort trying to sort of have the U.S. be this huge power all around the world. And that may ease some relationships between Beijing and the U.S., as I think Trump is actually much more open to a multipolar world than, for example, the Biden administration. But it's not going to be an easy time. But we can't give up. For example, as mentioned earlier, maybe there will be harder times to have U.S. student visas for Chinese. I think it's really important that we keep the flow of people between China and the U.S. going. That's the foundation for understanding. And particularly in difficult times like this, we need to keep that moving forward.
Yuquan, at the end, what do you think are important for the two nations, basically peoples and two leaders, probably to forge, a future? Probably that's mutually beneficial, and a win-win between China and the U.S.
Yes, I agree with the people-to-people exchanges is the foundation of the healthy development of our cross-strait of our relations with the United States. So we have to keep people going back and forth. This is the first thing. The second, I think the positive factor right now is President Trump respects President Xi Jinping. So I think the leaders' communication and dialogues is really important for our bilateral relations. And besides that, I think all the elements, the business and trade relationship is still very important right now. And of course, Trump talks a lot about tariff, all those stuff. But at the end of the day, I think the business and trade relations between China and the U.S. will continue to develop.
All right. With that, we are concluding today's show. Many thanks to our guests. You can also watch us on the CCG app on YouTube. I'm Xu Qinduo. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.